No, I'm not sure.
Rabbi, good morning.
Morning, Mike. How are you? Thank you, Barsha. Are you able to send to the group that we're on? We're on now. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Able to hear me? Yosef Atzadik, how are you?
Okay, Shavua Tov.
You want to be able to hear me?
Yeah, I'm talking to you.
You could be talking to me, but I understand. Doesn't mean you hear me. Okay, great. You look good, Yosef Atzadik.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
There's also,
What'd you say?
I will message to some people.
Yes.
Okay. Rabbi, while they are coming in, if you feel to do it, you can maybe talk about the portion of the week, but otherwise we can wait.
Okay. Someone wants the Zoom link.
Yeah, it's a bit.
So, Yosef, could you text me the Zoom link and I'll send it to somebody, someone outside the group?
Yeah, hold on.
Morning.
Morning, Avram, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, good. Okay. We're going to start.
Yeah, text message to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Yosef. Mr. Ariel, my man.
Yeah.
Good morning,
How are you?
Good morning, everybody.
Morning, how are you?
Baruch
Good
Hashem,
morning.
and good in you.
Good, Baruch Hashem.
Good morning,
Very
everybody.
nice.
Okay, we're gonna start soon. Someone outside, it's not in the group, asked for the Zoom link. I'm just gonna text them the Zoom link, and we're gonna get started. Okay. Mike is coming in.
Good
Okay.
morning, Rabbi.
Morning, Mike.
Shabbat tov.
Shabbat tov. Okay. We got into a very interesting Gemara, and you notice in this week's parsha, when you read this week Achemos Kadoshim, you saw about the Arla, you saw about the first 3 years of fruits at Arla that we had in last week. So now we're on Lamed Vav Amud Beis. We are on 36b. The Tapiclay. 3 lines from the top. You have it on Lamed Vav Amud Beis 36b. The Tapiclay.
Rabbi,
Yes.
hi, good morning. Good morning, Avram. I have just a quick question before you start.
Yes.
What is mean the molech when it says, because it sounds like Hashem was very not happy with someone that does molech. Is that avodah zarah?
Yes. Molech is a way of avodah zarah. What they would do is they would make a fire, and some learned they take their child and they would pass the child through the fire. Some commentaries learn, and that was a way to give it to the avodah zarah, so to speak. The goyim would give their child one. Some learned they actually the child would burn, would die through the fire, and some say that they made this fire in a way that they would pass the child through the fire. Maybe hopefully the child wouldn't die, but the child would go through the fire for the avodah zarah, and so they set it up in a way to worship avodah zarah with this in this way, making fires. Taking a child and sending the child through the fire. That was the way they did. That was one of the ways they wanted to serve that with the zarah in that way.
Okay.
Shalom Aleichem. Who is that? Morris.
Morning.
See you, Morris. Good to see you. You got it. You got it, Mike. That was the way of worshiping with the zarah.
Got
Good
it.
morning, Mike.
They
Morning.
killed the kids. Either they would kill
Morning,
the
Mike.
kids or try to
Morning.
do things that are very dangerous for the children. Is that clear?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, and Hashem is very angry about such type of action. Okay, so the Gemara says, we were talking yesterday, I know by the time we finish, we're going to be all experts in the slav tree and this caper bush tree, and we were talking about the fruit of the tree and the shell of the tree. And we found in the Gemara that the shell that grows around the fruit, so one of the rabbis, he would actually eat it outside the land of Israel during the first 3 years. The first 3 years of the tree, he would not eat the fruit itself because the fruit itself is subject to Orlah. It's the fruit of the tree. And the Torah says the fruit of a new tree that you planted, you can't eat the fruit the first 3 years. But the shell of the tree, the shell that grew around the fruit, he ate the shell that grew around the fruit, and it's edible. It's something that's edible, and they would make a bracha on it, and he ate it. Maybe he would make a shahakol on it, because others would make a borer priya. Let's say he would make a shahakol on it, and that shell and that peel that grew around the fruit, and it fell off before the fruit ripened, before the fruit matured properly, ripened, before it ripened. He would eat that shell.
Rabbi,
Yes.
yesterday in the portion, actually, we talk about that.
Yes, we spoke about Arlah, the first 3 years fruits, correct.
And
Parasha.
it's mentioned over there, when you come to Israel, it didn't say it in general. It said, when you come to Israel, then it obligates you to be in Israel only.
So that very good, we'll say. So therefore, the Torah talks about Arlah in Israel itself, and there's difference in laws between Arlah in the land of Israel and Arlah outside the land of Israel. There are those that say that Orla outside the land of Israel is rabbinic, right? Keeping Orla outside the land of Israel is Rabbanan, but many hold, and I think we hold la halacha, it's halacha l'Moshe misinai. They have to keep minat Torah, you have to keep Orla outside the land of Israel. So there is a discussion between, in a different opinions, whether it's minat Torah outside the land of Israel or Rabbanan outside the land of Israel. But we keep Orla outside the land of Israel. If you plant a tree, you have to keep Orla. You have to, not the first 3 years of the fruit you can't eat. But what about the shell that grew around the fruit and it fell off? So the rabbi ate that shell. So the Gemara says, and why did the rabbi eat that shell? The rabbi ate that shell because the rabbi held that shell is not the fruit. Shalom Aleichem, Joseph. Welcome back.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you for having us. And this is the best shiur in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for your warm words. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we're on Lamed Vav and Beis. We're on 36b. We have Mesechus Berachos, 3 lines from the top. 36b. So let's see what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, the Tepik lay the Nase Shomer Lepri. The Gemara's question is, there's the fruit itself, and there's the item that guards the fruit, that watches the fruit, that protects the fruit, a protection. Today we have something called police officers. The police officers are there to protect the people. The protection of an item is very key, is very prominent. It's something very important. It's very important to have police. It's very important to have something that protects the fruit. And the fruit that protects the fruit is that shell. The Gemara is asking, the shell that grows around the fruit is a protection. And since it protects the fruit, right, it's guarded with that shell, just like if you look at an orange. The peel of an orange protects the orange itself. It protects the fruit itself. The fruit stays beautifully underneath the shell. So the Gemara's question is, the Torah, when the Torah says, in last week's parasha, the Torah says there's something called orla, that the fruit, the first 3 years, you can't eat the fruit of the tree. But not only is the law you can't eat the fruit of the tree, the guardian of the fruit, the protection of the fruit, the shell of the fruit also is subject to the laws of orla. It's also subject that you can't benefit from the shell. You can't eat it. You can't benefit.
Rabbi, I had a quick question. So
yes,
we look at it that the peel and everything, it's inedible, right?
Sometimes the peel is inedible. The peel, the Gemara's peel of the caper bush,
right?
It happens to be an edible peel. But nevertheless, the rabbi felt it's not considered fruit. It's not the real fruit.
How do we differentiate? We differentiate the halachot, based on the edible and inedible, right? Like in terms.
You want to talk a little louder, Joseph?
I said we differentiate the halachot between the edible and the inedible, right? I mean, it's like we have different halachot, right? There's
right. But the Gemara is now saying now the Gemara is coming from a different angle.
Right.
Gemara is saying, even if, let's say, it would be unedible, even if you say that this kafris and this shell, this peel that grows with the fruit, even if you're not going to consider it a fruit, but nevertheless, it's a shomer of the fruit. It guards the fruit. So the law is, when it comes to orla, the first 3 years of the fruit that grows on the tree, not only does the Torah tell us that we can't eat the fruit, the thing that protects the fruit is also forbidden in benefit. It's subject to the laws of orla.
So Rabbi, the fruit that we reviewed, the copper bush or something bush, right? What's it called?
Caper bush, the slav tree.
The slav, yeah. So this one, they were eating the first year, the protection.
He ate it during the first 3 years. The first year, the second he didn't eat the fruit itself. He ate shell.
So it's not in line with what we're just saying. Now we're just saying that even the protection we're not allowed to eat.
That's the Gemara's question, Mike. Exactly. The Gemara's question is, Joseph, the Gemara's question is, even if you think you look at the shell, it's not the fruit, but it's the protection of the fruit. So how could the rabbi eat it during the first 3 years? We know that you can't, the protection of the fruit is also subject to the laws of Arla. That's the Gemara's question. How did the rabbi eat it? That's the Gemara's question, Mike. Joseph, that's the Gemara's question. It might not be, even if you don't consider it a fruit, but it's the guardian of the fruit. It protects the fruit. And we have a Gemara, the Gemara says, the tapically, Joseph, you hear what we're saying? The nas is shomer lepri. The kafrisin, the shell is the guardian, it guards, it protects the fruit. And the Torah says, as Yosef at Tzaddik, Yosef Harmon said, et pirio. It says you have to stay away, not eat the fruit. It's closed up from you. The fruit of the first 3 years is you have to stay away from. And it says et atafel pirio. Et teaches us the item that's secondary to the fruit. Umanihu shomer lepri. The protection of the fruit is also forbidden is subject to the laws of Allah. So why was the rabbi able to eat the kafisin, the shell? That's the Gemara's question. It was during the first 3 years of the tree, of the slav tree. He shouldn't have eaten the shell. That's the Gemara's question. Omar Rava. So Rava says, listen, to be count when the Torah says that if you're protecting the fruit, you're subject to the laws of Allah and you're not allowed to benefit from it. It depends what type of guardian you are. How much of a shomer you are. Are you a shomer all the time? Are you protecting all the time? Or you only protect some of the time. So the Gemara says, Omar Rava, Heichon Rina the Nasa Shomer Lepri. When do we say you're considered a guardian, that you're subject, you're considered a real watchman, you protect the fruit and subject to the laws of Allah? When the guardian, when the protection of the fruit remains, both when the fruit is attached to the ground, when it's on the tree, and when you take off the fruit from the tree, the protection is still on. However, but here, when the fruit is attached to the tree, this shell remains on the fruit. But when it comes off the tree, then this thing naturally falls off. And naturally, when you take this fruit off the tree and you put it down and you leave it to ripen, you want it to dry out, to ripen, then it falls off. It doesn't remain on. This protection doesn't remain on. It's not there constantly. Since doesn't remain regularly, it only is there when the fruit is on the tree. Therefore, it's not have the status of a real shomer. You got to have a protection that's 24/7, so to speak. Both when it's on the tree and when it's off the tree. But since when it's off the tree, it falls off, this protection, that's not called a real protection. If you take a orange, you take the orange off the tree, the shell remains on when it's always there. It doesn't go off. That shell remains. The protection remains. But this protection comes off. That's what the Gemara says. So now the Gemara has the following point. Just a little background in the upcoming Gemara. Anything that is considered that protects the fruit becomes, if the fruit becomes tamei, the shell that's around it will become tamei also. Similarly, if let's say something that's a handle, and you could go ahead and you have some sort of something that sticks out of the fruit, and you could pick up the fruit by this piece, by this stem or this item that let's say you have some, like an apple. You have that little piece that comes down the top of the apple. And you could pick up the whole apple by touching that piece. If you go ahead and you pick up the piece, you picked up the whole apple. So the law is, if apple becomes tamei, that piece is also, it's part of the apple. That piece will also become tamei. Now, if something protects the fruit, something that protects the fruit could also join in the fruit in the following way. What's the halacha? In order for something to make something else tameh, let's say I have a food and the food became tameh, right? Somebody that was tameh, somebody that came in contact with, let's say, a dead body or something touched the fruit. And he touched the fruit and there was the shell on the fruit, the protection on the fruit and the fruit itself. Now, in order for something to make something else tameh, meaning if something is tameh, to have the power to contaminate something else, you need to be the size of an egg, a beitzah. The food, if in order for a food to make something else tameh, the food has to have a certain size. If the food does not have the size of an egg is around 2 ounces, size around 2 ounces, an egg, it cannot, egg is, we say, let's say at a kazayas is like 1 olive is like a half of an egg. And let's say a kibbutz has like two olives. In order for a item, a food, to make something else contaminated, the food has to have a certain size. What's the size of the food to make something else contaminated? The size of an egg. So now, if the fruit, let's say I have a little tangerine has a certain amount of fruit to the tangerine, but then you have the shell around the tangerine. You could count the shell of the tangerine together with the tangerine, the fruit of the tangerine, and they could join to become an egg. If the total of between the tangerine and the shell is an egg, then they have the ability to make something else tameh. We could join even though the shell is not a food, but since it protects the food, it has the ability to be counted like the food itself. And then it has the ability to make something else tameh. Is that clear? Now, however, the handle of the fruit, which is like that little stick, that stem that comes out from the apple, you don't count, that does not join to make the size of an egg to make something else tameh. It does not, even though if the handle becomes tameh, the whole thing, even though they're one regarding if it becomes contaminated, the handle could also become contaminated, but you don't join the handle to make the size of an egg in order to make something else tameh. So that's a little difference between the handle of a fruit and the guardian, the thing that watches the fruit. The handle of the fruit just attaches to the fruit. It's something you could pick up the fruit by holding the handle. But the thing that protects the fruit becomes like the fruit itself all the way, even regarding counting it towards the amount of an egg in order to be able to make something else tameh. Am I clear, Mike? Am I clear or not clear? We're gonna the Gemara. We're talking now about. We're talking about the shell. Now we're talking about, let's focus in on the shell of the fruit that protects the fruit. It could be joined in to make the size that's needed in order to have the ability to contaminate something else. Is that clear? If a food became tameh, in order to make something else tameh, the food needs a certain size in order to have the power to contaminate something else. To contaminate something else, you have to have a certain size. The food has to be a certain size. If you have a little, let's say a little pea, a little chickpea is not big enough to make something else tameh. Even though the chickpea is tameh, let's say the chickpea was someone who was tameh touched the chickpea, but the chickpea is so small, everyone knows what a chickpea is? Chickpeas are big, everyone knows what chickpeas are? Everyone, Avram, you know what chickpeas are? I think so. So
Rabbi, is a chickpea considered a kazait?
No, chickpea is very small.
Very small, right?
Chickpea is hummus.
A hummus, right? But
Thank you, Yosef Furman Hatzadik. You're amazing. Thank you.
A chickpea is very small, much less than an olive size. So he got a good smile from you. So now the Gemara says the following.
The smile is the comment. The side comment.
Now the Gemara is going to ask the question. Eitivei. Baye is going to ask Rava the following question.
Yes.
Pitma shel rimon. Pitma shel rimon is, let's say, the flower of the pomegranate. And this pitma shel rimon, it protects it is considered a protection of the fruit. Why is it considered protection of the fruit? Because when you remove the pitma, when you remove this flower it's on the top of the, even though it's on the top, it's on the top of the pomegranate. It doesn't surround the whole pomegranate. But when you remove this pitma, like, we have like by the etrog, the pitum, the pitum of the etrog, right? The top of the etrog, right? So if the pitum, the top of this pomegranate comes off, the pomegranate.
Wait, Rabbi, are you mixing two things? Pomegranate and etrog are two things differently. So if
I understand, but just what is the pitum of an etrog? The top piece that's on top of an etrog, right?
okay, so why is that to do with anything with pomegranate?
What do you say?
He said if the pitum coming off the pomegranate.
Right. So the pitum, this pitum of the pomegranate, which is very similar to the pitum, sounds like it's similar to the pitum of the etrog, but here but what happens by the pomegranate, when you remove this pitum, when you remove this thing from the pomegranate will decay, will get rotten faster when this pitum is removed. When this pitum is removed, when this top flower on top, this top of the pomegranate is removed, the pomegranate starts decaying, starts getting ruined faster as a result that this pitum was removed from the pomegranate. So therefore, because of that, we consider the pitum of the pomegranate fruit. Because if the fruit is going to go ahead and go down in status as a result of the removal of the pitum, so therefore the pitum is considered a protection of the fruit.
So
and the pitma shall rimon, the pitum
Rabbi,
of the rimon of this pomegranate, vahanetz, and the shell that grows around the pomegranate, and it falls off before it opens. Vahanetz shalo ein mitzaref.
so Rabbi, you actually touch a good sugya, okay?
Yes.
Is the seeds of the fruit are also orla?
I would think the seeds of the fruit, I would think so. I would think it's part of the fruit.
It's the inside of the fruit, doesn't mean it's not something that normally you eat. You don't eat the seeds of the apple or the seeds of the avocado. You don't eat the seeds of
very good. Yosef would have to look up in the Shulchan Aruch about that question. We have to look. That's a good question to look up.
Because you throw them away anyway. But can you benefit from them?
In general, the fruit of arla, we said you can't benefit. The shell of the arla, the protection of the arla, also you can't protect. The protection of the fruit. And you want to know about the seeds itself, right? That's your question.
Yeah.
We have to look. You have to look that up in the Shulchan Aruch. But now the Gemara is making a difference between the pitum of this thing that protects the fruit. It's the pitum because it has a great effect on the fruit. Because if you remove the pitum, it will decay. The fruit will decay very fast. I want to say hello to Yosef's son. Shalom Aleichem. What's his name? Want to say hello to the nice young man? You can tell him I say hello, Yosef. Okay.
No problem. That's another one here.
Shalom, hello, everybody. Good to see you. So it says.
And another one there. Say hi.
Now,
Me, they're amazing.
Have a great day. So the Gemara says, "Vahanate shalom," but the nates, the shell that goes around the pomegranate, ein mitzaref. It does not join in to make the amount of an egg. remember what we said was that the thing that guards the fruit is part of the fruit also to be counted towards the size of an egg that you need in order to make something else tameh. But that's only the first thing that protects the fruit. But something that's considered a protection on top of a protection, if there is two shomrim, if there are two things that protect the fruit, so only the first shomer, only the first protection, let's say, would be considered the protection that could join to the amount of an egg. But the thing that protection on top of the protection does not get the status to join for the shear of an egg. Again, what we said, something that protects the fruit is like the fruit itself. That when you count, if you need a certain size in order to contaminate something out, make something else contaminated, we will count the first thing, the first protection. But if something is a protection on top of a protection, the Gemara calls the shell around the pomegranate a protection on top of protection, because it's a protection on top of the protection of the pitum that protects the pomegranate. So the pitum is protection number one, that has the status of the fruit itself, and you could count the pitum for the size of the egg in order to have the ability to contaminate something else. However, you do not count the shell that's around this pomegranate, but the Gemara considers the shell around the pomegranate as the second shomer. And the second shomer, the second guardian, does not get the law of the first guardian, and therefore cannot join in to the size of the egg that's needed. You need to have a minimum size of an egg in order to contaminate something else. So now the Gemara says, you told me that the shell of the pomegranate is not counted the size of the egg that's needed to contaminate some other food. Alma the lav ochahu. So we see that it's not an ochel. So we see it's not considered a food. The fact that you go ahead and tell me that if you don't count it towards the size of an egg, it's not a food. Because if it would be a food, right? Any food you count towards the size of an egg. Obviously, you're considering this not food. So if it's not food, therefore it's not considered, that's why you don't count it in. So the Gemara says, well, what do you utnan? And we learned in the Mishnah, Legabe Orla, we learned in the Mishnah, Klipe Rimon, the shell of a pomegranate, Vahaneshalo, and the nates of the pomegranate, the klipe gozim. And here's going to be, maybe we're going to address Yosef's question here. The klipe gozim, the shell of the nuts, vagarinim, and the seeds. You hear that, Yosef? The seeds of other perot. Garim chayavim ba'orla. The chayav ba'orla. Right? So we see clearly, Yosef, to answer your question, that the seeds, it says it's chayav ba'orla. It's subject to the laws of orla. Now, you told me that the nate, you told me that the shell around the pomegranate is not considered a food. So why is the shell around the pomegranate, the nate shallow, this nate, why is it forbidden in orla? It has to be that it's forbidden in orla is because it guards the pomegranate, even though it falls off, yet it's still obligated and it's still considered forbidden in orla. So what do we see? We see the following: even though the shell that's around the pomegranate, the peel that grows with the pomegranate, and before the pomegranate ripens, the shell falls off. Even though it falls off, it's still considered a protection of the fruit. because we say that this shell is chayav b'orla. It says klipei, the nate shelo, the nates, this thing that grows the same way we had the nates of the slav tree, the thing that grows around the kafrisin, the thing that grows around the fruit. And the Gemara had a question: Why did the rabbi eat it during the first 3 years? And the Gemara said, "Isn't it a protection of the fruit?" And the Gemara says, "No. The reason why he ate it because this falls off. This doesn't remain on. This protection falls off." But the Gemara has a question. Look, we find by the pomegranate, we have the same situation. We have this kafisin, this thing that grows around the pomegranate fruit. It also falls off. It doesn't remain on all the time. When you after you cut the pomegranate off the tree, this shell eventually falls off. And yet we say it's still obligated in the Arla. And if it's obligated in the Arla, it's clearly because it is considered a protection. But it's not considered a food because it doesn't join to make the size of an egg. And yet it's able to be, it's subject to Arla. So that's the Gemara's question. It's a little complicated, but let's see if everybody's able to follow. The Gemara's question is, you told me that you're not considered a shomer, a guardian, protecting the fruit if you're not there all the time. If you're only there when it's on the tree and not when it's off the tree, it's not called a guardian. And therefore you told me that the law that the guardian is subject, the shomer, the guardian that guards the fruit is subject to Arla. You told me it only applies if it's there all the time. And if it doesn't remain on all the time, it's not considered the law of a guardian. So the Gemara knocks that out. Abaye says, no, I'll show you. It doesn't remain all the time, and it's still considered a shomer. It's still considered a guardian because it's still subject to Arla, even though it's not on all the time. So how did the rabbi eat the kafisin, the shell of the slav tree? It should be subject to the law of the shomer, the guardian of the fruit, and the guardian of the fruit is subject to Arla. That's the Gemara's question. You'll say, Mike, Avrami, Shmuley, everybody, you'll say that's the Gemara's question. The Gemara is questioning the answer that the Gemara gave before. You told me if it's not on all the time, protection is not there all the time. That's not called protection. You gotta have the protection all the time. And if it's not always protecting, if it's not there all the time, if it falls off, if the protection falls away, if that shell falls away, it's not considered protection. You that we see by the pomegranate, it falls away and it's still considered protection because it's still subject to Arla. So why by the slav tree did he allow him to eat it? It should be. That's the Gemara's question. Elo Rava. So Rava comes up with the following answer. Elo Rava. When do we say it's considered a protection of the fruit? Only when the item is there at the time of when the fruit it was completed. When the fruit completes it, when it's there, when the fruit becomes ripe, completely ripened. But the kafras lessa b'shas kama peri. When the fruit becomes completely ripened, when the fruit becomes completely ripened, it's not there, and therefore, since it's not there at the time that the fruit becomes completely ripened, therefore it's not considered a true shomer. Let's see what the commentary says. So the Gemara is saying that the reason why this slav tree, the shell that falls off is not there. It's not there with the time when it leaves the fruit before it finishes the ripening. Meaning, by the pomegranate, that shell remains on until it ripens, and then once it ripens, it falls off. But since it was there until the fruit ripened and it became proper, ready to eat, so that's called a shomer. So even if it falls off after the tree, you leave after it ripens, but since it was there until the fruit became fully ripened, so that's considered a proper shomer, and therefore it would be subject to orla. But the slav tree, this shell, it falls off before the fruit becomes completely ripened, ready, edible to be eaten. And therefore, if the shell drops off before the fruit is ripened, that's not considered a true shomer, because you didn't protect the fruit until it was ready to be eaten. Because the shell fell off before it was completely ripened. So the Gemara says, Eini, is that so? V'amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Barula. Rav Nachman says in the name of Rav Barula, Hani matachali the orla. Matchali orla is the shell that grows on the dates. When the dates are very small, there's this. It's similar to this kafrisin that grows on the slav tree. The shell that grows on these dates, asiri. We say that these shells that grow on the dates are asur. Halil v'nasa shomal peri, because these shells that grow, this peel that grows on the dates is a protection for the date. The Gemara explains, v'shomal peri emes have. When do they become? When is this considered? When do they protect the tree? B'kufra. We have the date, and we have the item that's protecting the date. These small little dates. When the dates are very, very small, so that they still did not yet reach its full ripening, and b'kufra. When the dates are small, and yet we see that they're considered a shomer. We see that this shell that grows around the fruit, even though it did not remain till the fruit ripened, until the fruit was at its full height, we still say that it's still considered a shomer. So the Gemara's question is, you told me that in order for something to be considered the guardian of the fruit, it has to be there until the fruit reaches the stage of that it's edible. We see from the dates that it did not reach the state that it's edible, and it's still considered a protection of the fruit. So the Gemara says, Rav Nachman, Savalak Rav Yossi. Rav Nachman, who was strict about this law, about the shell around the dates, he holds like Rav Yossi, Ditnan. We learned in the Mishnah. Rav Yossi omer smadar. Smadar is, let's say, these little grapes. And before the grape was ready to be eaten, let's say it grew a certain size, before it was fully ready, it didn't reach full growth. And once the flower around this grape falls off, and you're able to see each grape or sore. You can't eat that at that point, the neshu peri. The grape is considered a fruit already once it reached that level, even though it wasn't ripened, even though it's very small. Neshu peri. According to Rabbi Yossi, it's called a fruit. So too the dates, even though they're still very young, they're very small, they grew a small amount, he holds they're considered a fruit. Therefore, if it's considered a fruit and therefore it has the shell around it, so it's considered that it has a shell when it became a fruit. If you're considering it a fruit, if you're considering it subject to Arla, even though it's so small and it had the shell around it during that time, therefore he considers it a shomer. But not everybody agrees to that. Not everybody agrees to Rav Nachman. Upligi Rabbanan aleh. The Rabbanan argue, and they hold only when it's really completely ripened is it considered a fruit. And therefore, if the thing that protects the fruit is not on the fruit at the time that the fruit reaches it ripened, therefore you do not, it's not subject to, it doesn't have the status of a shomer. So again, what does the Gemara want to say at this point? The Gemara wants to say the reason why the rabbi ate the shell, because this shell did not remain on the fruit until the time that the fruit was ripened, was ready to be eaten. It came off the fruit before it was capable of being eaten. And if it's something that comes off, something that protects the fruit, that does not remain on the fruit until it's able to be eaten, does not have the status of the fruit itself. The fruit you can't eat because the fruit is fruit and you can't eat the fruit. But the shell, we say the only time the shell will be considered subject to Orla if the shell remained on the fruit all the way until it was able to be eaten. And since it came off before the fruit ripened properly, therefore you can eat the shell. That's what the Gemara says. Maskeflo Rav Shimi Barashi, so Rav Shimi Barashi, Rav Shimi Menardo, Rav Shimi from Nardo asked the following question. Ubishari Yulani mi pligi rabbanon alel. Other trees that are not, you see, the case that Gemara brought before about the grapes, very small grapes. You know, they weren't ripened yet. There the Rabbanan say we don't consider it a fruit, and we don't consider the shell anything because it's so small. But what about other trees? Not grapes. Mi pligi rabbanon alel. The Gemara says, "Vatnan." We have a Mishnah. You're not allowed to cut a tree that has fruit of Shemitah. During the Shemitah year, right? You're not allowed to waste the special holiness to the fruit of Shemitah, right? You can't waste, you know, people are very careful during the Shemitah year. You can't waste any food that grow during the Shemitah. And generally you can't waste food, but you can't cause, to cause a loss to fruits of Shemitah. The Torah says that you can't cause a loss. We learn that from the pasuk. You have to eat it, the fruit, but you can't do something to ruin the fruit. And Tosfos asked the question. We'll see more about this, and the Rambam says now. Let's see what he says. Tosfos says the question is, in general, you can't cut a tree. You can't cut. There's something called bal tashchis. You can't waste, correct? And yet, let's say you have a tree that sometimes if you cut the tree down, you have more benefit if you rebuild in that place, right? You want to build a house. And if you cut the tree down, there's much more value by cutting down the tree than keeping the tree there. So technically, you should be able to cut down the tree. But people, by the way, are very careful not to cut down a fruit tree. They're very scared because they're afraid that something should not happen to them. It's dangerous to cut down a fruit tree. Even by cutting down the fruit tree, you'll have much more value of the property. By cutting down the fruit tree, people are very scared to cut down a fruit tree. But nevertheless, technically, halachically, they're allowed to, but they don't do it. But so therefore, even though in a case where it won't be subject to the laws of bal tashchis, wasting of tree, because let's say there'll be more value by cutting the tree down than not cutting the tree down. But nevertheless, during Shemitah, you're not allowed to cut the tree. And the special law during Shemitah, you can't ruin the fruit of a tree of Shemitah, even though the value will be greater by getting rid of the tree. But Shemitah, the food, you can't cause loss to the food of Shemitah. And I think in Eretz Yisrael, they're very careful. You got to see in Eretz Yisrael during the Shemitah how people with their Shemitah fruit, how they deal. You got to see about it. So it says, at what point is it considered a tree that is considered a fruit tree on Shemitah? You can't cut down the tree, right? We just said you can't cut down this tree on Shemitah. When is it considered a fruit tree on Shemitah that you can't cut it down? So the Gemara says, Beis Shammai omrim kol ha'ilonot misheyotziu. Once they start giving out fruit, all trees, when they start giving out fruit, that's considered a tree. Meaning until they give out the fruit, even though it's a fruit tree, but it doesn't give out any fruit, you could cut down that tree, technically. But once the tree starts giving out fruit, some explain, others hold that once the leaves of the fruit come out. But here Rashi seems to be saying over here is once the fruit, if the fruit of the tree starts coming out, at that point, you can't cut down that tree during the Shemitah. Mishayotziu, Mishami, I'm going to call him, that Beshami is very strict. Beis Hillel Omrim, Hacharuvim, the carob tree, Mishayisharshahu. When you have a certain amount of a certain amount of the fruit is coming out, that it's a certain amount, a certain size, that and it looks like the fruit is like hanging like by a chain. There's certain amount of the fruit, and that's when in the carob tree, if it reached that level, that it looks like you have a chain of these fruit, of the carob fruit. That's considered the size that you have to go. That's considered the tree that you can't cut down. Vakfanim, and if it's a grapevine, mishiagoru. When it grows a little bit, it has to grow. Not when it grows a little bit of the fruit grows, and we'll see what that means. What's considered grua? What's considered what's considered, you will see how much is this size of the grape. We'll see, we'll stay tuned. Vazesim mishianitzu. The olives, when the shell around the olives grow, and once it reaches the level that the shell that grows around the olives, that's considered the olive that you can't cut. And the olive that you can't waste during the Shemitah year, where the Torah prohibits you to waste the Shemitah fruit. Even if there wouldn't be any issur of Bal Tashchit, but there'll be the issur of wasting the fruit of Shemitah when the olive grew the size that there's a shell around the olive. Usha kol ha'ilonot, and all other trees, mishiotziu. When the fruit starts coming out, once the fruit starts coming out, then you can't go ahead and cut it down. So we have V'omar Rav Asi, hu botzer hu gerua. So Rav Asi says the botzer that we said by the grapes, the young grapes, hu gerua. That is it's the same size that we said by the Girua, by the vineyard over here, when we said when the vineyard gives off the size of Mishiagoru, means it's a small grape. It's a very small grape, and that's the same size of Botzar. And Botzar that we find all over the root Botzar. Botzar is the same thing, is the same size as Girua. Now, for who pull a lavan, and that's the size of a bean. The Gemara says, pull a lavan sakataita? What do you mean? We're talking about grapes. So how can you tell me? The botzar is the Girua and it's the bean? We're not talking about beans. We're talking about grapes. And la'ema shi'uro kepul a lavan. The size of the grape that we're talking about is the size of a bean. This pula lavan. Now, the Gemara says, the Gemara says, man shamislei. Who is the Tana that says botza in? That he says that it has to reach the level of botza. That in order for it to be considered a fruit, it has to reach the level of a botzar. The samadalo, but samadar is not considered sufficient. Rabbanan, it's the Rabbanan. So what does this mean? Rabbi Yossi holds that even something that's smaller, Rabbi Yossi holds that even a samadar, Rabbi Yossi holds that a samadar is considered it's considered a fruit. That's what Rabbi Yossi holds. And therefore, if it's considered a fruit, so then the shell around it will, but so Rabbi Yossi holds that samadar is considered a fruit. And this Kamandiyama says that no, samadar is not big enough. You have to have something bigger than that. You have to have a botzah. So man shamisle the amma botza in that you need this larger size. Usmadalo, and the small size of the fruit is not good enough. Rabbanan, it's the Rabbanan. Uktani, and yet the Rabbanan hold shar kolilono. When it comes to other trees, misha yotziu, the Rabbanan hold other trees when the fruit starts coming out, it's considered a fruit. So the Gemara says, so too the shell also needs to be, since it's considered a fruit, and once the fruit of the bush starts coming out, so then it should be considered a fruit. If it's considered a fruit, so then the shell should also be considered a shell of the fruit. Meaning to say, if you're considering by other fruits, by other trees, and slaf is a different tree. If you're considering it a fruit that's called a fruit at an early stage, so if it's considered a fruit, so why isn't the peel considered a shomer? It's protecting a fruit. If it's a fruit and it's there at that time, and the shell, the kafrisin is there at that time, so it should be considered protecting the fruit, and therefore it should be subject to arla. So why was he able to eat the shell of the fruit? That's the Gemara's question. A little complicated. Elam Arava, and we're going to end with this point. Elam Arava. When do we say it's considered a protection of the fruit? The Gemara says, if you take away the protection of the fruit, the thing that protects the fruit, and the fruit dies, that's considered a real protection. But if you take away the protection of the fruit and the fruit doesn't die, that's not really called a protection. And if you take out the shell of the kafrisin on the slav tree, on the cape bush, if you remove that shell, the fruit will not die. Therefore, it's not called a shomer. Therefore, it's not called protection. And therefore, that's not the protection that will be subject to orla. Since it's not so vital to the fruit in that aspect, that if you remove it, the fruit doesn't die. When you remove the guardian and the fruit dies, that's called a protection. But over here, when you remove the shell of this caper bush of the slaf, the fruit doesn't die, therefore it's not subject to orla. The Gemara said there was actually a story. They removed the shell, that outside of thing of the pomegranate that grew around the pomegranate, that thing similar to that grows around the slav tree, but that thing was so vital to the pomegranate. When they removed that nates of the pomegranate, then what happened was the yavish rimona, the pomegranate dried out and died. That's why the nates of a pomegranate is subject to arla, because that nates that grew with it and protected it, when you remove it, it dies, the fruit itself. So therefore, it has a status like the fruit itself, it's subject to arla. However, v'sheklu lepircha de betita, when they removed the shell of the slav tree, the kayem bituta, the fruit remained. The shell wasn't so vital, didn't make or break the fruit. Since it didn't make or break the fruit, therefore it's not subject to arla. And the Gemara says, and that's how we're going to end over here. In the parentheses, it says halacha is like Rashi, that he threw away the fruit, he ate the shell, and arla, it's not. Since by arla it's not considered a fruit, so regarding brachot also, it's not considered a fruit. You will not say a borei pri eitz on that. Rather, you'll say here, he says you'll say a borei pri adama on that. Okay, I wish everyone a great
Rabbi,
complicated Gemara. Needs a lot more work to look over the Gemara, to see the different stages of the different fruits. When is it considered a fruit? The subject of the shell of the fruit. I want to. Anybody have anything?
Rabbi.
Yes.
So yesterday in the Torah portion, it says that first 3 years that the fruit will be orla, right?
Right.
So let's be more. There is a couple of stages of this question. So the first question is the first 3 years that the tree bring a fruit, or the first tree, like you put a seed today and it's growing and become a tree, and then in 3 years from that day it's become not orla.
So again, the first 3 years from the time you planted the tree, the first 3 years from the time you planted the tree.
So by the time I put the seed in the ground, it's the 3 years.
It might not be exactly the seed. It might be from the time it takes root, whatever. We have to see exactly, but it's from that early stage of yes, the early stage.
Okay. Now the Torah mentioned also the 4th year. It's also it's forbidden for you to use it because you have to bring it to the temple, to the holy temple, right?
To Jerusalem.
To Jerusalem. Now, what we're doing in these days?
No. Good. So you would eat it there. You would eat it in Jerusalem.
But what if you cannot go to Jerusalem to eat it?
Right. So that's what. So they do. So in Israel today, it's the same question. What do they do with Truma today? What do they do with Ma'aser? Right. So they do. They put it onto they redeem it onto a coin, and they have a whole process in Israel they do today. They do it on, they put it onto a coin, and they don't use that coin, but they're not able to use that coin because they can't. But in Israel today, they have to deal with all the Trumot and Ma'aserot. There's a process how they redeem it onto a coin.
Yeah, like who you give the coin to or whatever, and
Yeah,
what's the
they
value
don't give
of
the
the
coin.
coin.
Right. You have to look up exactly what they do in Israel today. But that they deal with it. Usually, it's the hashgacha deals with it. The hashgacha takes care of it. Food that have hashgacha. If you go to a market, it doesn't have. You go to an open market. You have to learn about how do you deal with the masrot and the trumot, all these laws. If you go to the makolet, the local makolet in the neighborhood, they already removed. It was already the maser was already removed. The trumot and the masrot. But if you're going to an open market somewhere, right, a public market, then you have to ask how do they, you have to how to find out what to do, how to take off the masrot exactly. All right.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. We should come to the Holy Land soon, and we'll learn how to do it right.
That's true.